Hello and welcome to the Poor Hammer Podcast, episode 38. I'm your host, Brad. This is my co-host, Eric.
How's it going?
So I went through a bunch of Reddit threads and some Discords for different sub-factions and all that jazz, and compiled a current list of things that people who play a sub-faction or who play competitively had opinions on sub-factions on things that needed nerfs or buffs that they wish had gotten addressed. This episode is just going to be us going through each faction and the changes that the royal we of we want changed.
Yeah, the royal we as in me.
So, without any further ado, let's talk about something wrong with every faction.
Ooh, sounds good.
Before we start saying what we want changed for every faction, we can't say that 40k is in a bad spot right now compared to historically.
No, it's pretty solid.
The game is as balanced as it's been in forever. At least since you and I started playing 2 years ago and some change.
Yeah.
So, we can't complain too much. So, let's start things off with Sisters of Battle.
Yeah, there's a single sub-faction. There's a single way to play Sisters.
It's a problem with a lot of these codices, and I didn't write it every time. But, with Sisters, it's especially egregious.
And it's been known since the change, so there's only really one way to play it now.
So Sisters, the thing I got out of what people were saying is, if you're not one of, the top Sisters players in the world, you're begging for Sisters to be better.
Okay.
Sisters has the problem of, if you are one of the top players in the world, people are begging for nerfs.
Yeah, I mean, that happens with secondaries that are abusable.
Yes, and very specific lists that require specialized knowledge on how to play a certain list. It's the slant list problem where, in this case, it's not so much a slant list as it is, a very technical list.
It's the only list.
If you are incredibly good at piloting this list, you can crush.
Yeah.
If you are the average player showing up to, your first tournament in 6 months, you will be crushed.
Honestly, there is a lot of changes that could be made to make Sisters a more internally balanced faction, and they did nothing for that.
Yeah. Honestly, it would be look at the sub-factions. You can delete what makes my OP sub-faction OP if you get the other ones so that I have a choice.
Right.
Because, with Sisters, it's that Bloody Rose got that entire extra supplement. If we said, hey, no more using these stupid-ass supplements nobody liked and you can't buy any more legally.
I mean, Sisters would be unwinnable.
They would drop dramatically. I still think they could pull, a 40% win rate. Valorous Heart has some builds that exist still.
Really?
There's fringe Sisters lists that would still exist, but, you're dropping to Gene Stealer Cult level. We'll get there.
Yeah.
Custodes up next. So with Adeptus Custodes, they're in a pretty good spot right now. They're in that nice middle area that's kind of boring to look at.
Yeah.
But from what their players were saying, the things that they would like fixed is their Forge World units is half their army because of how Custodes works. And a bunch of those units either get dropped out because of sub-name checking, where instead of working on a Terminator, it works on a Laris Terminator.
Okay.
Or it requires an Auric weapon, which conveniently doesn't exist on the Forge World models.
Right.
It'd be nice if the Forge World models could be used as options in their lists.
Sure, that seems a bit nitpicky. I think the next thing that you're going to bring up is the more important one.
I don't even think that's nitpicky, to be honest, because it's a problem with several things we're going to talk about where when you've only got 4 models to play with in your line.
True.
Can we have the other 4 to play with?
Yeah, I guess I hate Forge World, so I don't give a shit.
I would be equally happy if we said resin, Forge World resin models, anything like that, gone, no longer legal in 40k. Certain factions just got screwed by saying that, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
You lost the Dreadnoughts in Chaos. We don't even have them now.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we have the Leviathan Dread again, actually, because it's plastic now, thank God. But, I would be happy with that outcome as well. But if it has to exist,
it should be clean and playable, and yeah.
if people can buy very legal Forge World resin that was definitely made in the UK and not China or wherever.
Yeah.
If they can acquire that by whatever means necessary, then god damn it, let it be playable so that they have more options in their list.
Yeah, so the next thing is Termes OBSEC. That's like fundamental to the army ideology.
Yes, the fantasy of your army.
Yeah.
A key thing when you're looking at game design, what is the fantasy of your player? Like, if you want to play a wizard, you do not want your wizard to have an axe. You want your wizard to have a staff.
Yeah, you don't want your wizard to be punching people. Like, it's not like, I mean, it's kind of funny, but it's not like an actual wizard.
Exactly. It's not why you're here. So, Terminators lost OBSEC in the last round of nerfs, and to be honest, it's pretty well agreed upon that if they had it back, it wouldn't be a big change to the win rate of Custodes. It would be one minor annoyance. I would be fine with giving them it and seeing what happens to their win rate, because I know that the whole thing with Custodes is supposed to be like the 1 versus a million, like they stand on the point.
Right. There's no flinching, there's no surrender kind of thing. It's just like, we're the last bastion. Why are you not OBSEC?
And awkwardly, my Thousand Sons are better at holding points than Custodes are at this point.
Yeah. With all the buffs that you get, yeah.
The fact that my Scarab Occult Terminators are allowed to have OBSEC, even though they're not troops.
Yeah.
Your Terminators are troops, so yours get OBSEC that way. Mine just get called out as getting OBSEC. The way Custodes used to get, and they just took it away from them because they were winning.
I feel like we'll get to the Thousand Sons in a bit. Yeah.
Okay, so let's move into AdMech, who did get a change in the data slate. It was not much of a change, and in my opinion, it was the worst possible change.
I think it was hilarious. Like, the way it was called out was like, everything's been reverted. You're back to normal. Yay! And it was like 2 or 3 things, I think, that was like all that was left.
Enriched Rounds is back to being a 4-up, which was super fucking toxic, and we just had a whole thing about this with Votann.
Yeah.
And Lucius can now have a 2-up save and cover for the entire game again, which was so fucking miserable to play against when that faction came out. And it felt very un-AdMech.
Yeah.
You've got these frail little robot boys that you should be carving up, and they all have a fucking better save than a Space Marine.
And, like, at the end of the day, though, AdMech is still dumpstered because of the CP changes, not anything else, really. Like, that's the problem with AdMech.
Yeah, so I didn't really want to bring this up because it's like a whole thing, but AdMech specifically is one of the armies where at the next data slate, it's going to be the next season. It won't be Nachmund, it'll be Warzone flippity flop.
It'll be a whole, like, rework type thing from ground up.
Right. We'll get point adjustments, we'll get new missions, new secondaries.
There could be CP adjustment.
Just like there was this time.
Yeah.
The big one would be if they undid the CP nerf, not completely, but like undid a portion of it. If the first Relic and Warlord trait were free again.
I actually do kind of like the idea of what it's doing right now. It's different, but a little tweak here and there.
It would help armies like AdMech, Orcs, Thousand Sons, any army that is it's always got to take more than, you know, a Warlord trait and Relic. They're trying to get extras because their characters are a heavy lean of their army.
Yeah.
Those ones got more punished by the CP change than others, which again was a balance reason, and that's why it happened in the first place.
Yeah.
But most of those armies are not doing great right now.
Basically.
So it'd probably be fine to step off a little bit.
So I like the next show notes. We've got the little like tidbits of like, oh, we're going to do, you know, this faction. And IG is just, ah ha 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 ha.
Yeah, get a codex, idiots.
Because that's your balance. Get a codex.
And I'm sure once you get a codex, everyone will complain about you. And you'll get to feel special like the rest of us did this edition.
Something like that.
One day you'll see 9th edition right before 10th edition.
Exactly.
I'm sorry, guard players. At least it's thematic that you're getting shit on so hard. You're the red shirts of the universe, and you're just getting dumpstered by GW with your release date.
I mean, honestly, GW does some great meta stuff with that. Like, IG just gets dumpstered, and Gene Stealers just gets ignored.
We'll get to Gene Stealers.
Perfect meta analysis right there, GW. You've nailed it. Grey Knights. I mean, honestly, I think they're in a fine spot. There was a lot of issues when you could split sub-factions and really abuse Nemesis Dreads, because those are extremely strong for the point value.
At the same time, I feel like that hasn't changed. It's just you can't do the most extreme version of that. You're just still doing the same thing, but not as good anymore.
Exactly. Yeah, which is disappointing. So it would be nice to have Terminator's point dropped, but I mean, it wasn't expected with the balance sheet. So
No, it's for next time's wish list when you could actually get point adjustments. Like,
yeah, I know that some people are like, let's give AOC to Nemesis Dreads. And I'm like, how about not? I don't want to have to be stuck on Nemesis Dreads only. I want to play my Paladins.
and the army already has enough reasons to not play Terminators. It'd be nice if we saw more internal balance in that codex.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things that I would like with some of the choices that you have for psychic abilities that you get to choose. But honestly, it's fine. It's in a fine spot other than some point changes for Terminators. So hopefully in the future we get that change.
All right, so up next we have Imperial Knights, which I'm going to sound like a broken record when I get to Chaos Knights. But to start off with Imperial Knights, they've got the same problem Custodes do. Their Forge World models just don't have synergy with the rest of the codex.
Which is another point of just remove Forge World.
The worst part is all the good-looking knights are Forge World knights.
That's true.
Like, Cerastus Frame is so much better than Questoris. Like, this is not even a hot take. Like, it's by far Forge World's #1 selling point to stay alive is the Cerastus Frame knights are beautiful.
It absolutely is.
Give me a Knight Lancer that's actually good, and I will play the shit out of that. I will print my own, though, because I'm never buying Forge World resin again.
I was just going to say this. I was like, I mean, it's the reason that Forge World models exist, but it's also the reason that you get your own printer, because those Forge World models look like trash from Forge World. But whatever.
So that's like one problem. The bigger problem for Imperial Knights is if you want to play a Dominus class, like you want to play a Castellan or something, they don't have Bondsman. It feels awful that, like, we just got a book about Imperial Knights. You can go read it, get interest in the faction, want to play like a nice loreful list, get all your models together, crack open your codex and go, what the fuck? Why does this play nothing like what I just read?
Yeah.
Why is it the guy who is supposed to be the head honcho leader, like the equivalent of a fucking captain in Space Marines, except for like way more fucking important than a captain, but a chapter master equivalent. Someone that important just doesn't have any buffs or auras or anything that they give out to their subordinates when the faction's entire fucking deal is buffs to lesser people in the faction.
Yeah.
It's psychotic how wrong it is.
It's a bit weird, and even beyond like the balance, it just like thematically is dumb.
Yeah, balance-wise, honestly, IK technically is like pretty balanced right now.
Yeah, I think they're in a fine spot.
Their lists are slightly less slanted than CK lists, which are horrendously slanted.
To be honest, it's fine for IK and CK to be slanted because of how they're fun. It's the same thing with like Tau. Like, you've bought into that faction knowing that like this is what you get. Like, you're playing big knights.
I don't agree with you because A, you aren't playing big knights, which is the problem with the slant. It'd be like if you got into playing Grey Knights and you don't get to play Terminators.
Ha 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 ha.
Yeah, so it's equivalent problem, Uno reverse card. Like, the problem is, right now, Imperial Knights tend to play like one Questoris frame knight and then just a bunch of Armigers. CK will get to.
Yeah. Okay.
So let's move on to 40% of the player base is here for this one.
Space Marines.
Yeah, so this is where I went, oh shit, that rumor was actually true. When I got to that part of the data slate, and the only Space Marine change was like the worst change in the data slate, they should have just not altered Space Marines if they were going to do this.
It was a weird change.
So, rather than actually balancing the faction in any way, they just changed one secondary by a single point per turn, and it was like a mediocre secondary you weren't really thrilled about in the first place.
I do think it's going to help. Like, it's going to make that secondary not bad. It's not good, but like, I thought we didn't do secondaries.
And that was my problem, is They changed the secondary in the data slate when I was like, obviously, since they're not touching any of the broken or terrible secondaries, that's an only every 6-month change. Okay.
Right.
As long as we have that as a rule and a limit, and we'll go, okay, then we can't really complain that you didn't touch these, because obviously that only gets changed at books. Fine.
Which, yeah, that's acceptable. I mean, secondaries are a big thing to change. That's how you win the game, basically. Sure, we'll leave those to the other balance points.
But then they changed the secondary instead of actually doing anything.
I did love the sheer salt that they put on the wound in the little, like, blurb in front of it of, like,
yes!
Get good. You're all noobs, get good, and you'd be fine.
I loved it. As a non-Space Marine player, I loved it. I'm sure you guys are pissed, but...
Yeah, I was like, holy shit, GW. Do you not realize where, like, most of your player base is? But, hey, you know what?
So, I am, like, 100% sure after this data slate that Space Marine Codex 2 is real.
Okay.
Because there's no way you don't balance that. It reeks of when Chaos Space Marines knew they were getting a second wound.
Right.
And that a second wound and a repoint adjustment for the second wound would make them feel a lot healthier to play for the first 2 years of 9th edition.
Yeah.
But GW refused to give it because then when you got your codex, it wouldn't feel as much of a good, jab in the arm.
Yeah, it would be like, I mean, I've already got this.
And I am almost 100% sure that an Armor of Contempt Space Marine 2.0 with a 9th edition Guilliman sheet, etc., that's all coming.
That's a good idea.
Because, as a reminder, Guilliman doesn't have a 9th edition data sheet. His is still 8th edition.
I did not know that.
Because he's not in the Space Marine Codex. He's in the Ultramarine supplement you have to buy from 8th edition to play 9th edition with Ultramarines.
Right.
Their super doctrines that Space Marine players play aren't actually part of 9th edition. They're part of a book that was never legacied. Space Marines is a fucked up nightmare faction that should be deleted and reworked from the ground up.
That is probably the correct way to balance it, honestly. But won't happen, so.
Delete all old Marines. Horus Heresy exists. If you want to play old Marines against old Marines and be a 55-year-old boomer, go do it over there. Finish your Indominus Crusade stuff. Update the rest of the line so that it's new Marines. Drop it down to like 50 to 60 data sheets from 120. And it would be a lot easier to balance Space Marines without accidentally breaking them. Anyway, rants about Space Marines aside, I do understand the problem they have of technically if you were a normal faction where everyone plays the correct sub-faction to win tournaments,
Right.
Blood Angels are still actually getting a 50% win rate. So if you buff Space Marines, Blood Angels will now be a problem. But you want to play your fucking special Snowflake sub-faction instead of being a Necron player and playing OBSEC all.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah, there's just not much to it there. It is what it is, I guess.
Yeah, it's a problem child. And it always will be, because it's like...
The only way to really fix it is to delete it and start again.
Yep.
And that's just not going to happen.
It either has to be Codex 2 or 10th edition when they redo it.
Enjoy your Ultramarines. You'll have fun. They're blue.
Alright, we have made it out of the Imperium, but we gotta speed this up so we're not here forever. Chaos Demons. The only note is Brad rant.
Yeah, I was like, let's speed it up. Brad, go ahead.
I'll keep it short. Chaos Demons. What codex?
I'm sure that at some point we'll do an actual episode on them and you can give your real thoughts.
I've been trying to avoid it because it's very negative.
It is very negative.
This episode in general sounds negative, but it's not really. Again, I do not believe every single wish on this is a good idea to all implement, but it is what each faction is wishing for.
Yeah.
But for Chaos Demons, how to play Chaos Demons. Go buy Be'lakor, go buy 18 Flamers. Hope to Christ neither ever gets nerfed because it's the only good thing in the faction. Ta-da! Khorne's okay.
I like that Be'lakor is good. Be'lakor's cool.
I've always liked that Be'lakor is good. I wish I could just play 2 Lords of Change instead of Lord of Change plus Be'lakor to be strictly better.
Sure.
Because I want to play Tzeentch, not Tzeentch that's secretly Be'lakor Tzeentch, because otherwise I don't get access to as many fucking spells as fucking Thousand Suns. How the fuck?
Right.
Let's move on to Chaos Knights.
This is another one that, like, they're in a fine-ish spot statistically,
but not a fine spot from a health standpoint internally in the faction. Again, like Imperial Knights, we can't really complain about win rate or anything. There's nothing we need buff-wise. The problem is, when you look at a Chaos Knight list, you gag a little.
Yeah, dogs are good.
We don't play the Questoris frame, which for us is called Abhorrent. The Dominus class is essentially in the book at gunpoint. The Knight Tyrant is technically a data sheet.
Only technically.
The rest of the book doesn't believe that.
Yeah.
Our Relic and Warlord traits, on every single one except for 2, says Abhorrent class only.
Brilliant.
It calls out and says, you may not put this on anything but an Abhorrent class.
Yeah.
It's fantastic how much it hates the Dominus class. Many of them say Abhorrent or War Dog, but it very clearly does not want you to play Dominus and does not want you to play Cerastus.
Yeah.
So, the other part of this is obviously that the Cerastus frames are, again, the coolest knights. I am the dumbass who bought a Knight Castigator. I will never buy from Forge World again. Please make my favorite fucking knight good.
Yeah. I mean, like, the thing is like, the dogs are what's keeping it. So, like, if they had added more to, the large knights, they would have had to do stuff to the dogs as well.
My problem with the Questoris frame is not like it needs more. It's that it costs 75 points more for the frame that it sits on than is worth.
Yeah.
Like, if you compare what you can buy in War Dogs to what you would buy in an Abhorrent class, like, if you just sat there and put out the amount of shots, the amount of damage in melee that each would be capable of, the amount of wounds that you would have to take off, the fact that one is OBSEC, one is not.
It honestly feels very much like, I mean, you made the joke of, like, Strike Marines versus Terminators for Grey Knights. It honestly feels very similar, where it's like, if you just look at it statistically, they're not close.
You can just mathematically prove that you should never take one.
Right.
To the point where my least favorite thing in existence happens. I own an Abaddon because I am a slut for meta shit. I wanted to kit bash him into a sweet Thousand Suns thing anyway, so I already did that, but I mostly used the excuse of I kind of have to play Chaos Knights at a reasonable level with our competitive playgroup. It is so many points to put like one of these big Abaddon, Magnus, Morgenval equivalents, right?
Yeah.
You would never splash it, even if it affected things in other factions of your overall faction, right?
Right.
Even at 300 and something points, as a reroll aura and some other stuff, Abaddon is cheaper than just getting a big knight who's a reroll aura.
Yep.
Because again, that fucking frame is like 75 points more than it should be.
Yeah.
So we end up splashing Abaddon in Chaos Knight lists, and you end up with a bunch of War Dogs and a guy who's not even part of your fucking faction. The dumbest fucking thing to occur in this game.
It's a bit weird, yeah.
So, enough of me ranting about my own codices. Let's talk about CSM.
We did kind of bring it up previously, like Creations of Bile popped up in popularity and strength too late in like the data collection for the to actually get hit in an FAQ.
And it's not like it's a 70% win rate.
No.
It's just, it's slightly above, and it probably could just use that FAQ that Harley's got, and then it would be done.
Yeah, and that would be good enough. But even with that, like, CSM's not in a great spot.
It's not a bad spot either, though. Honestly, it has more healthy sub-factions than a lot of other armies do, but again, it has the Space Marine problem.
Mm-hmm.
Where, like, people don't play Chaos Space Marines, they play Black Legion, or they play Iron Warriors.
Right.
And when you get to that, there are fan favorites that are just not very good compared to the other sub-factions, and changing up their secondaries would have solved that. But again, they don't touch secondaries every 3 Oh, shit.
Right, except for the non-Chaos Space Marines. They got secondary change.
Yeah, secondary changes would be nice for CSM. Possibly a little slap on the wrists for Creations of Bile. Try saying that 5 times fast. Definitely got it on my first try.
Oh yeah, definitely. Beyond that, I don't know too much about, I mean, it doesn't seem like anybody's shouting.
No, it is like all the other middle of the field lists where it's like, here's the things we'd like and, the things we would do preemptively to avoid an over nerf.
Right, right.
So moving on, we got the external parts of CSM, which is first up Death Guard. There's not a lot to do with Death Guard. The last point update did fix it so Plague Marines had a spot again, which is nice.
I don't know, dude. It's tough because, like, Death Guard just bores me so much that I'm like, I don't even care.
And the reason it bores you is the problem with it. It's the base design philosophy of Death Guard.
Yeah.
The slow, tanky anchor army. It doesn't do anything. And when it does something, it's because you fucked up and got close to it.
The worst part, I think, to me, is, like, there are things that, like, they don't do anything, but they're flashy, It's like, oh, that didn't actually do anything, but it looked cool.
Mm-hmm.
Death Guard doesn't have that. It's just, we don't do anything.
It is mediocre and boring instead of mediocre but really fun.
Exactly. So I don't know how to fix it because it's just boring. Like, I hope that they could add some excitement to it, but I don't know, man.
From what I got, there wasn't a lot people were asking for other than, less boring options to play with next edition. Their thing is like, it's not going to get solved by a data slate. It's not going to get solved by some point changes at this point. They're in a pretty good spot on those fronts. Their problems are core codex design.
Yeah, they just need more spice to add to it.
Okay, so we're back to me with Thousand Sons. Thousand Sons has the exact same problem it has had the entire edition. We are one unit. We are Scarab Occult Terminators. Yeah, the whole codex kind of ends up in an awkward spot because as much as I love Cabal points in practice in games, the restriction Cabal points put on your list building, because you have to keep adding more Psychers to your list to make it so that you can properly use enough Cabal points in a turn to make your Psychic phase make up for the points your models cost. You end up with a very specific list that you basically have to run. And the more you deviate from that list, the lower your win rate. It's just very unfortunate that there is an entire Zongor part of the army that is totally worthless.
Yeah, but Zongor sucks, so nobody cares.
I, again, like Zongor more than I like a lot of the dudes in cans. But I come from being a Tzeentch player where I would prefer if it was all demons. But I want to play Tzeentch because they're the Psychic faction, and they fucking forgot to put the Psychic part of Tzeentch in the fucking Tzeentch army, so I guess I'm a Thousand Sons player now.
Yeah, that's about right.
So, when it comes to Thousand Sons, it's basically, the Scarab Occult Terminator is an amazing data sheet. The rest of the book sucks. The end.
I guess next, Craft World?
Yeah, so now we're into Xenos, and Craft World is the one that I couldn't really get much feedback on. The basic thoughts on it was the army overall had been too strong since the Codex, but most of the army is too weak.
Like the individual parts of it.
It was just abusing like one-trick ponies like Hail of Doom and like a couple data sheets that are way too good.
Yeah.
And then like if you look at overall Craft World, it's like, do you even remember that all of the Wraith stuff exists? Even though it's like the coolest part of the army looks-wise, in my opinion, with the bowling pin heads.
It is. It does seem like there's no, this is the problem, this is what needs to be fixed kind of thing. It's just like a lot of small tweaks maybe could be useful.
It's weird that they got a bunch of new models and like a nice little range update, and then it's like spam Dire Avengers. But I don't know. I don't have too much advice for Craft World, honestly, because our Craft World player is still only half built with Craft World. So hasn't even really played it.
Yeah, so I mean, it's all hearsay, essentially.
Yeah, I dove through what I could, but most of the Eldar knowledge I have comes from my Drukhari.
Yeah.
Moving on to Harlequins. They did get touched. Again.
Yeah, and they need to keep getting touched.
I have a like special little rant of my annoyance that Harlequins were like that perfectly balanced 50% win rate army with their 8th edition codex in 9th edition.
Yeah.
Their sub-factions do less now than they did before we got the 9th edition book, and they're winning more. The one that you know as Light Sadith was called Soaring Spite, which was a much better name.
Yeah.
Soaring Spite has lost what Soaring Spite used to do in this update. It literally doesn't fucking work anymore.
Yeah.
So what's the point of the subfaction? You added a new add-on to the subfaction, broke it in half, and then deleted the original part of the subfaction. And, like, the problems in Harlequins are just painful.
Yeah. I do love that, like, it actually is exactly, like, they messed with the Dark Sadith, Light Sadith, and now it's, like, Blaze of Light. Like,
Well, Blaze of Light is part of Light Sadith.
but, like, dude, I don't know, man.
It's just really dumb to me that it's very obvious that Harlequin suffers from what we talked about before with Votann, of they tend to point data sheets in a vacuum. So the more of your rules that aren't on your data sheet and are hidden in stratagems and army rules, the better your model is.
Yeah.
And Harlequins is essentially 90% army rules. So they wildly underpointed the army.
And, I mean, it also doesn't help that, like, there's 8, 9 data sheets for Quins.
Yes, absolutely.
Like, there's not enough options to make those tweaks. So it's like, how do you balance it when, like, the fundamental part of the balance is stuck in, like, the external rules as opposed to the data sheets, but there's still only 8 or 9 data sheets.
Right, so you end up with the problem of if we over-nerf troops, the entire faction is useless.
Right.
Because there's no other knob you could turn instead. You can't go, well, they could fall back on Snoops. Because they only have troops to deal with.
Yeah, and I expect that that'll be fixed eventually.
I'm concerned it won't, since Quins went backwards. They went from having a codex to being a couple pages in the Eldar codex.
I hate that codex and how it subsumed so much. But people like Harlequins, even though rules-wise and competitively people hate it.
Yes, that's probably a pretty decent take. Most people at least enjoy Harlequins, and their negativity is like, they don't want to hate Harlequins.
Exactly.
It's that the game is making them do it, because Harlequins is one of the most interesting factions to face.
Oh, yeah.
Like, when you play against them, you're like, man, you break so many rules. I have to think so outside the box compared to normal. This is so weird. I want to run it back.
Yeah, right. It's like, hey, let's run that again. That was neat. That was weird. This is different.
It helps that they are a very unique looking army in addition, so you're like, they look so cool.
Yeah.
I wish there was more of them.
I do hope that there are more of them, and that'll give them more options so that they can have an easier time of making balanced while still being, like, unique, instead of just being like, let's just keep cutting at their uniqueness because we can't figure out how to balance these 6 data sheets.
So, hilariously, after being the problem children of 9th edition for 8 months last year, as a Drukhari player, I will speak for us. We're pretty goddamn happy compared to the rest of you.
Yeah, it's in a solid spot, actually. Like, it's fine.
Whenever I go to think about which of my factions I want to play, I'm always like, it'd be kind of fun to play Drukhari, because it's just so fun. Like, there's nothing wrong with this faction.
Yeah.
We would take, for free, if GW wants to write it, to give us Kronos and Talos being core back. It didn't affect our win rate that much, and they're really fun.
Sure.
And I like playing mono covens, and I have all my models all right there. I would like to play mono covens, but I lost core on the stuff that I was having really a ton of fun with. But
whatever. It wouldn't change things much.
Overall, the faction's a 10 out of 10 compared to majority.
It's in a good spot. It's doing what it's trying to do and what you expect it to do. Yeah.
It is the best codex of 9th edition, hands down.
I guess we can move on to the other 10 out of 10.
I just read it.
Genestealer Cult, right? That thing that I always remember and GW always remembers.
Yeah, the flavor win that was for getting Genestealer Cults again. If they don't get a point change next time, I'm gonna die laughing.
I think it's fucking hilarious, dude. Like, it's just funny. Like, just keep it going. Keep the meta joke going, dude. I love it.
Yeah, so Genestealer Cults, there's some easy things they could do to Drukhariify them, if I can be so bold.
Sure.
The mad science part of the army is almost 1-for-1 with Drukhari on, like, I can point to a unit in each army and show their data sheets to you, and you go, wow, this really does feel like it's Covens, huh? But they have the Aberrants, which are like their big muscly dudes, and they're not core. And a lot of Genestealer Cult players assumed they were going to get core, so they had, like, more to play with, and they just didn't get it. And there's some other problems with the construction of that army, especially if you're looking at the Aberrant side of things. If you want to play that way, the CP changes were very unkind to you.
Yeah.
There's some weird restrictions on how applying your buffs works. There's problems in Genestealer Cult on, like, a technical level with that. It does not help that it is an army that is wrinkly brain up there with AdMech to play, and the payoff is you're playing fucking Genestealer Cults.
I do think it's weird on how rare core is on the datasheets.
Yeah, it's so arbitrary.
Core doesn't make any sense to me. I think they had a plan, and then they abandoned it, and then they made changes to it.
You can't say that when you look at Space Marines and Necrons as the first two.
I think the plan was Necrons, and then they went, oh, we can't sell Space Marines on that. Let's fuck it up.
The plan was Necrons, and they went, well, what in Space Marines is the core of Space Marines? Every Space Marine.
Exactly. So, yeah, it's weird. But I guess speaking of core, Necrons is next up.
We got fixed the way I wanted. I'm so happy.
Yeah, they're honestly in a fairly good spot, and the core change for character vehicles is the correct decision.
Yes, it was dumb.
It was just stupid. So, I mean, it's like, it's in a good spot, but I know that you've complained about, like, Necrons isn't Necron-y.
Again, if we're comparing to Drukhari, Necrons and all the others could use fixes internally like that.
Yeah.
To flavor them up. And I'm hoping that's what, like, 10th edition codices will be like.
I hope so.
That's the one thing I'm hoping GW got out of this stuff. Because they clearly have shown an understanding with the things they've done to fix Necrons. My rant for Necrons this time is not OBSEC all. It is also OBSEC all. I just want that on the record.
Okay. I was like, wow. What happened? Which Genestealer took you over?
My main rant is they released that fucking Destroyer Army of Renown in a White Dwarf.
Sure.
So you need a random magazine to play that Army of Renown.
Sure.
I hope in 6 months when you have this episode, you know which White Dwarf to go hunt down so you can legally obtain it.
Yeah.
This Army of Renown was as poorly written as the Necron Codex.
Oh, no.
You didn't read it, did you?
No, I do not even remotely ever read anything from White Dwarf. I hate that as a thing. I just fundamentally refuse to accept it's a reality.
Okay, so they made the Destroyer Cult Army of Renown. Rather than do the clean thing of make your flayed ones into troops like everyone has always begged for, so we have the option of a melee troop. Instead of that, they made it so you could run Vanguard detachments for 0 CP. If you played the Army of Renown, you obviously can only play Destroyers and Flayed ones. The Vanguard detachment, for those who don't remember, is the elite heavy one.
Mm-hmm.
That means your Scorpec and your Flayed ones are eating up the majority of your slots. There you go. Unfortunately, your Heavy Destroyers and your Locust Destroyers are in the heavy support slot, which you can only bring 2 of. The refund is only for your Warlords detachment, so if you have to double up, you're still spending CP for the bonus detachment, so it's not really saving you that much that way. Those are all normal things I expect out of GW, honestly. The part that pissed me off is how long ago, I believe it was 3 data slates ago, maybe 2, did they fix our command protocols. Our command protocols got fixed so that they worked army-wide. They weren't bubbles around characters. They just relied on any character being alive, not specifically our nobles.
Right. It actually makes sense and is a good change.
So 9 months later, in a monthly magazine, they added this Army of Renown. In this, they added, you don't get command protocols, you get super de-duper destroyer protocols, which are command protocols except for a new list of them.
Brilliant.
You choose them before the game. You don't get to choose the extra one that's on all the time. They are bubbles around characters. They rely on your war. It is the fucking codex, not the version you play.
I love it.
A 9-month-old change. It's so fucking aggravating.
I think it's hilarious because, like, I hate White Dwarf. Like, that's just not a thing to me.
So my only thing I can think of, like, to rationalize this that does not involve methamphetamines is this must have been written a while back.
Oh, yeah.
For that new book that they bragged about. We didn't put rules in it. You guys hated when we were putting rules in these. So there's no rules in this. Coincidentally, the next day they were like, there's rules in the new White Dwarf for an Army of Renown, like there should have been in this book. I'm pretty sure they just ripped the pages out of the book, like possibly physically, so that they could brag about not putting rules in the book. And then just shoved the rules verbatim, typed them up in the next White Dwarf that was about to ship out, and shipped it out.
It's possible.
Which would explain why this has like 9-month-old rules. And it's the only way I can think of it.
It could also just be that White Dwarf is fucking pathetic and they don't actually do good things.
It's so aggravating that it's like proof that GW doesn't learn. It's the fear that you have where you're like, oh, I'm so happy they learned how to do everything right. 10th edition will be better.
No.
The future will be better.
No.
And then they do this and you're like, oh no, that's all a lie. This is going to repeat forever. They're never going to improve.
Yeah, it's exciting. I can't wait. All of your rant aside, Necrons are in a fine spot. They got the change that they needed, and they'll be fine for a while.
I'm happy with Necrons, but we had to talk about that at some point, and it wasn't worth a whole episode. And it kind of fits into the problem with every faction.
Sure. I guess we can move on to orcs. And I have mixed feelings because, like, orcs are in a not bad spot. They're not in a good spot, but they're fine.
There are successful orc lists.
I just want there to be a clean way for the leadership to not be a problem for the Green Tide.
Yeah.
I want there to be some change to that. I don't know what it is at the moment. I think it is something that can be done in something like this, and it's not a point change. I think it is like some type of like, oh, we're going to introduce Army of Green leadership, something, whatever. I don't know, dude. But I want something like that, and I don't think, like, even if they did fix that, like, it wouldn't really change or overall balance. It would just give another slight option.
So the question is, are they just trying to remove hordes from the game? And if that's the case, they needed to say it flat out, like,
yeah,
rip the Band-Aid off ahead of time when they launched 9th edition and be like, by the way, orc players, don't get used to running 100 boys. Guard players, you're going to be running a lot more armor and you're not going to care about your troops.
Yeah.
Demon players, we're capping all of your units at 10. Oh, shit.
Yeah, I mean, if that's the actual plan, okay. I mean, I'm not particularly thrilled by it, but okay. I can accept that if that's what it's going to be. But there hasn't actually been any, like, that's what the plan is. So it feels like Orcs is missing a part of their fundamental fun, and I would like to have that as an ability.
You never played Orcs in 8th edition, obviously, because we got you Orcs after the 9th edition codex.
Yep.
In 8th edition, I forget the name of the rule, but it was the one where the boys' leadership was the number of boys left alive.
It was something like that, yeah.
And then they also, like, double nerfed Smash in Heads or whatever, that one stratagem you have access to. That's supposed to make it where you can make them pass morale.
Oh, Breaking Heads.
Breaking Heads. There you go.
Yeah.
Like, that got nerfed in, like, 2 different ways.
Yeah, it's like a weird aura thing that I guess I don't know what it was before, but it's not particularly good, and it's 2 CP if I recall correctly, which is ridiculous.
It was 1 CP, and you just killed one of the boys, and then they passed morale. It was kind of like shooting guardsmen with a commissar.
Yeah. Like I said, like, orcs are in a reasonable spot. There are different ways to play it.
Goth Pressure is a good list.
Yeah, I would like to have something to make that Green Tide feel better with the leadership type stuff. Also, bring back the one thing that they had with like the custom jobs being free with the upgrade stuff. Let me have that. It's not going to change anything.
I was so going to give that to you, and they were like, no, we're not going to FAQ the fact that we gave Silent King Core on accident because we were not reading. We'll FAQ that one, though.
It's fucking stupid. Because, like, it changes nothing, realistically. Like, it's just a little bit of fun. Let me have it.
It made a mediocre list a good list.
Even then, not really good. It was just, like, competitively fine. So, whatever. Orcs are in a fine spot. There's some good fun with it.
All right, the final two. First up, Tau. They're slightly over-nerfed. They were part of the Panic nerf where they nuked Custodes and Tau and Eldar all at once.
Yeah.
It stuck the hardest on Tau because Tau is the least healthy codex because, again, it's one of those, like, the whole codex revolves around the Crisis Suit being the only thing that can move out of the back line without being destroyed instantly.
Yeah, it's fundamental issues with how Tau is expected to play, and it's always going to be there until they, like, change Tau's expectation.
Give us katanas. How fucking cool is a Gundam?
Yeah.
So yeah, my main thing with Tau is just they survive on slant lists right now. Either you're playing like a weird Triptide list, or you're playing your typical Crisis Suit spam, Farsight Enclaves.
Right.
There's a couple lists that can work. All of them look as slanted as your average Thousand Suns list. And they're all less reliable than the Thousand Suns list.
I was just going to say, and like, it's slightly different because it's still Tau and like, it's not, so.
There is the problem. The Sunshark Bomber is one of those planes that's a little bit stupid for the points. It's not like Nids with Harpies level bad, but it's like AdMech level or Orc level flyer.
Yeah.
Where like no one gets into Tau to play an airplane. They want to play Gundams.
Yeah.
The good part of the army should not be I put in 3 Hammerheads and 2 Sun Bombers.
Yeah, I mean, I do kind of like the Sun Bomber, though, so.
Yeah, the Sun Shark Bomber, whatever it's called.
Yeah, whatever it's called, dude. It's kind of neat looking, but that isn't really why you got there. So I don't know what the actual fixes for this are because, like I said, like I think Tau fundamentally has a problem with the codex and what its expected is. It's in a fine spot statistically, and that's about as good as it's going to get, in my opinion. If they change too much, it'll be either complete trash or overpowered again. So,
yeah.
So, I guess we can end it off with the Tyranids.
So, Tyranids obviously got hit with their worst offender, which was playing Leviathan with a bunch of warriors. That luckily got destroyed, although it's still probably one of the best options, even with how much it got wrecked. The most egregious portion of it was destroyed. It still has 5 other layers of disgusting.
Yeah, this is a good start. I think it needs more.
I think most of what it needs is going to be point adjustments, which was never going to come right now. It's going to be at next data slate.
Yeah, I think so.
And I think if they were already planning on point adjusting Tyranid Warriors and the Harpy, then what they did is probably enough if they're like, hey, we're doing that in 3 months anyway.
Yeah, I'd still like to see Harmagaunt's changed a little bit, but yeah, slight point changes here and there. I think will bring Nids into a fine spot. I think they'll still be strong, depending on how ham they go on the point changes. But expecting reasonable point changes, I think Nids will still be in a good spot. They'll play like you would want them to play.
Yeah, and it's worth noting, like, Tyranids players aren't complaining that their models are bad. Like, they're one of the widest range of playable models of any faction. So, like, this is more a, how do we nerf them without destroying their variety that they get to enjoy?
Yeah, exactly. Because, I mean, that is one of those, like, we want to try and make it so that you get all these options, but you're also not just like, we get all these options because everything's busted.
So I want to see the dust settle, see where the win rate ends up now that Leviathan is not so brain dead easy to play and never lose.
Right.
You'll have to actually play your games. I'm over exaggerating. They only in air quotes had a 60% win rate. It's not like it was an auto win, but it was very comfortable compared to your opponent's game.
I do think previous changes have been in the right direction with like the Hive Tyrant Warlord changes, that type of stuff all bakes in together with the latest changes to make it more fair type thing where it's like you're playing a fair list. It's not just like, oh, I'm taking advantage of dumb things that people forgot about.
Yeah, let's see what happens over the next 6 weeks before we talk about what Tyranids needs next.
Yeah, definitely.
It's going to take a while to readjust. I have a feeling it's going to swing wildly for the first couple weeks as people figure out, counter-figure out, back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, it will be funny if people show up expecting to use some of the other lists, playing it the same way that they would play the Leviathan list. That win rate is going to tank. Because, yeah, that's not going to work well for them. But
I overall think the game is in the best spot it's been in forever. Yes, there are still outliers that need to be fixed. This episode should not be taken as like the most negative outlook on where things are. Overall, I'm very happy. These are just the things that we know every single faction is wishing for.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm okay with the smaller data slates when things are doing well and like are fine.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we don't need to massively shake things up every 6 months. We've got new codexes coming out. Like, that's going to shake it.
All right, so if you have any alternate opinions on what you want done to your army or whatever, don't be shy. Share it with us. We'd love to hear it. If you think that these changes are all dumb, don't worry. I'm not endorsing them, but you can tell us about that anyway.
And if you want to tell us why Death Guard is not super boring, let me know, and I'll continue to ignore it.
But that's enough of this topic. Let's get out of here for the week.
Sounds good.